One, change must be achieved ethically. I once made a tax increase in Ulster County by telling people it was temporary. It was one of the most shameful decisions I ever advanced. The reason is, it could have been temporary. It's hypothetically correct that that sales tax increase was, and perhaps I know a few that have been, well, some have been reduced actually at the national level, but no reversal of any of sales tax increase in my experience. Unethical behavior delegitimizes change agents. Be mindful of what the state law requires. I am a big believer in changing state law. I've pounded my head against that goal a long time. I've helped Andrew Cuomo change the state law for consolidating or for diminishing the number of villages in New York. But when you're advancing change, you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to know the parameters that exist right now so that you can get done now what you can. You don't have some pie-in-the-sky goal. Another story, I know that I'm wandering, but New York Times had an editorial last week condemning the idea of a constitutional convention for New York. Virtually my entire career has been about getting New York to hold a constitutional convention. I've been head of the commission, the state-appointed commission to hold the constitutional convention. I passionately believe that if we don't change the fundamentals of New York government, we're condemned to mediocrity into the distant future. You know, I have to accept that we have to achieve the change. And New York Times thinks that's a scam. They think it's explaining that an option we can't have is the best option, therefore we have to accept mediocrity. We have to keep working toward what we can achieve while we're working for the ultimate. The perfect can be the enemy of the good. Remember that people will be against you. That's fundamentally true. People who are employed by government are fearful when you talk about reducing government size and achieving efficiency. But we must understand when you try to do that, when you talk to them, that time can be your friend. Because you don't have to achieve change all at once. You can achieve it over time. People retire. People change positions. Opportunities arise. We're combining the police departments of Saugerties Village and Saugerties Town in Ulster County because the police chief retired. And there was an opening that we could exploit. And other retirements are pending, so we could achieve it, save money, lower the tax burden, or reduce the increase of the demand of the tax on the taxes, maintain the same level of public safety resources. But those who are disadvantaged will resist, so they have to be, ultimately, you don't need a consensus to make change. You need sufficient agreement to effect the change in the venues where acting is required. Also, be respectful of the idea of community, and finally, be mindful of local history. We talked about the deep affection for the village of New Paltz and the town of New Paltz. I'm sure it's not dissimilar to the affection for local jurisdictions here. Find ways to collaborate among jurisdictions rather than advocating hopelessly for the abolition of one or the other entity. Now, I've spoken at a general level and I've spoken far too long. I'm happy to take your questions, and I will answer them if I can't. If I can't, I'll try to find answers and send them back to you. Sir?
You didn't mention privatizing any of the services.
Yes, I did. I said contracting with private parties or not-for-profits as one option. Privatizing has great promise, but it also has risks. The classic risk is privatizing, losing the capital investment that you need to deliver the service, and then being at the effect of one service deliver in the market. So it has to be done. That's a risk. The potential benefit, if there's a lively market, is of course lowering the cost, because and we have to make sure that the efficiency of the private party is not achieved is genuine. One interesting thing that Goldsmith, who's now become the deputy mayor of New York City, has done is to set off competition between public sector and private sector providers, so that he would allow public sector units to bid for work, say maintenance of trucks, against private sector, and also provide incentives for those public sector workers if they could achieve efficiencies so that their own compensation would improve. And that was enormously, it used the private sector, public sector competition. It didn't always produce a win on the private side, but it produced a dynamic that was very productive. Yes, ma'am.
I have a problem with the length of time people have to work before their benefits become available to benefits. For instance, in the military or policemen, if you're not in an armed combat, 20 years in the military, and you live to be 85 today, I don't know how our government can afford it.
Right. You've touched upon an issue that I didn't mention, but it's a fundamental point of concern of people who are worried about the costs of public sector pensions, and then what's called double dipping, people retiring and then returning to employment, often with the same employers on the public sector side, under some contractual arrangement, for example. So they get a pension and they get compensation. We've had particular trouble with that in New York. I have been involved with trying to renegotiate labor contracts in their particulars on the public sector side. My experience is very kind of particular. In New York, we have a legal environment where the terms and conditions of employment persist while you have the matter under negotiation. So people don't get raises. Let's say you're making $10 an hour and the contract expires. You don't get raises, but the other terms and conditions of your employment persist. So the pressure on the workforce on the labor union to come into agreement is de minimis. So we have to make some changes in the legal environment for negotiation. We also have to get more powerful negotiators into the room for local governments, especially smaller local governments. The public employee unions, I sound anti-union. I hate to sound, I'm not always anti-union, but on this I certainly am. I've represented management a lot. Public employee unions bring in statewide resources into negotiation with small communities. The small communities can hire, at relatively high cost, can hire attorneys or experts in negotiation. But if they could collectively negotiate, and if the kind of one jurisdiction being leveraged against another stopped because there was a collective negotiation, local governments could do better. Generally speaking, in New York and in 8 other states, once a person enters a system and the pension rights are defined, those rights can't be changed for that person. They can only be changed for people coming in de novo. So that's a big issue.
You know some regions or states that are really pushing the envelope and making some progress on utilization of shared services?
Well, there are places that are in much better condition than we are in the Northeast because they are able to reach out into unincorporated territory and to include that territory. So if you go to the Southwest, for example, you'll find much larger territories encompassed within one jurisdiction and greater success in interjurisdictional contracting. David Rusk, in his, I don't know if you know who David Rusk is, but he's a very famous person who's written about this. Takes his model from most models from the Southwest. Arizona is, and New Mexico are states that he talks about. But we have, it's interesting. Let me give you an example. We have a civil service law in New York that says that the counties have to provide the civil service resources for all the governments within their boundaries. Now, we have school districts too that have civil service employees, although teachers aren't.